So first things first, who are you? What's your role? And where do you work?
I'm Katie Greenley. I am the current OSS Community Manager at Chronosphere. Previously, I was a Community Outreach Manager at CNCF, focused on the ecosystem and engagement management there.
Now, Katie, your story with the CNCF goes back quite a ways. How did you first come into contact with Kubernetes and the cloud native world?
Yeah, when I first started at the CNCF, I was working on the events team. So my first contact with Kubernetes was setting up KubeCon Seattle 2026, helping to spearhead that engagement for the community. I remember when the project first got formed and Dan Conbring brought in and Chris Anichek helping to be the interim ED at the time, and all the chaos that was first forming the project and how exciting it was for Kubernetes first coming in. So when all of that first started, it was this kind of groundbreaking phenomenon that you just didn't really realize was going to be a phenomenon. It's kind of like the Beanie Baby bubble is what I like to call it. Like everybody was like, right, grasping at it, like excited for it to come, and they're talking about it and they're telling you it's going to be big. And you're kind of like, is it going to be big? I don't know. I have no idea. People have told me things are going to be big before. And I'm setting up KubeCon Seattle and people are telling me it's going to sell out and that I don't have enough space. And I'm like, I don't know. This is all the space I have. And sure enough, we didn't have enough space that first year, which is a good thing. It was a really good thing to have because it allowed us for when we went to Berlin 2027 or 2017 and then into Austin 2017, like we knew we really had to expand and the demand that the community was really bringing in at that time.
Very good. And, that's interesting going back, thinking where KubeCon is now in 2016. Do you remember how many people attended that KubeCon in Seattle?
It was a little short of 1,200 people. It was like, I want to say like 1,100. It was because we just didn't have the space. And we were selling hallway tickets for people to just come in and be at the booths because like we couldn't get people into the rooms because of the fire marshal laws. So like there was such a demand. People just wanted to be in the hallway talking to people and going to booths and talking to people at booths, which is not a typical thing that we did at the time for Linux Foundation events. And it's not something we've ever done since. It was just something that we did in order to meet the demand that the community was bringing in.
So once again, seeing this at a very early stage, and obviously we look at the numbers now for KubeCons where we're talking about 12,000 people, 13,000 people, much, much bigger venues, but seeing that buzz from early on and what it was about Kubernetes that was attracting people, like you said too, in those early days, is this really going to stick? Is it maybe just a one-off? Maybe it happens in the US, but it's not going to happen elsewhere. But then you've seen that scale now, to all the different places where there's been KubeCons in Japan and China and India, as well as all the KCDs. So you really have seen this, from its infancy. And I love the Beanie Baby reference. I'm definitely from that generation, so I can relate to that as well. That's good. Now, the Kubernetes cloud native ecosystem moves very quickly. What's worked for you in terms of staying on top of all the changes so that you stay up to date and don't get lost in the noise?
Oh, that's a great question. There is so much going on all the time, right? There's so many different projects. I think we're at 230 plus projects in the CNCF ecosystem at this time. I think in order to stay on top of what's going on, it's joining the open TOC call just to hear what's happening when it comes to the technology. That's open to anyone at any time. Checking out the latest announcements on the CNCF site. The Linux Foundation has a really great PR team, and they're very good at coming forth with announcements frequently and as quick as they come out to give the community the latest and greatest. Of course, I'm biased because I used to do the KubeCon events, but for me, it's always going to the KubeCon, Cloud Native Con events, because that's where you're going to really get that engagement with the community, learn what's coming out new, with the community, whether it's through tracks that are being held there, or even being in the project pavilion, talking to the different projects that are hosting kiosks there, or just being part of like the conversations that are happening in the hallway. You know, when you're talking to different individuals, that's when you start to hear, oh, you know, this vendor over here has this really cool product, or have you heard that this project's coming out with this, or that this is coming to be a new project coming into the ecosystem. So be aware of what's happening next, right? So those kind of conversations really spark at KubeCons. And I think that's where you get the latest and greatest. Of course, in between, it's always being at the TOCs, being at the marketing. If you're part of a member company, the marketing committee calls. If you are able to join like a SIG group or a tag, those are also open calls. They have open calls as well. And then always reading the different announcements the PR team's putting out.
Very good. That sounds, very wholesome and multifaceted to get different inputs. In terms of, you've interacted with a lot of people since you got involved. Is there anyone in particular who you would say was instrumental in helping you level up? Maybe coming from an events background, getting involved in different aspects of the community. We all know that, there's the technical stuff that we all have to learn. In terms of your experience, though, who would you like to single out as one or two people that helped you level up?
Yeah, I think for me, the first person that comes to mind would be Dan Kahn. I know that he was really pivotal in the way that he shaped CNCF in those early days of, the sky's the limit. He never felt like, oh, it's just going to be, a lot of people had this like idea of like, it's going to be a scheduler. And it was like, for him, it was like, no, it's going to be everything, and it's going to be anything. And it's going to be so much more than what you even think that it is even today. And working underneath him, he really loved to grow people, and he really loved to give people feedback to be the best version of themselves. So anytime I interacted with him, he was always pushing me to think about how I could be, presenting the information, in a clearer or crisper way, or what is it that I really want out of my career, and where do I want to go to next, and how do I want to grow, and is events where I want to be? Is it something else that I want to do? What am I able and capable of doing? And thinking beyond what just was next, and what else could there be? So I really do believe that Dan was instrumental in me thinking about where and what I could do within this ecosystem. And I think he was instrumental in many ways of where the ecosystem is where it is today, because he really did have this vision of where it was going. I do attribute that greatly to Chris Anichek as well, because he really has that great eye of like what projects are coming in and what projects should be part of this. And I do think that Chris gave me a lot of confidence when I decided to make that change into events and supporting the community. He was one of the first people to advocate when I wanted to make that change, that I was going to be really great in that role. And he was just kind of that strong believer of like, you can do this, and what else can you do? And anytime I took on something else, he was like, yep, Katie's got it. Like anytime something came up, he's like, don't worry about it. Katie's got it. Like she's great at this. She's no problem. And I think having those kind of people behind you, that's kind of not maybe outwardly cheerleading you, but like has the confidence and the ability that of the things that you can do, even when you yourself is having a little bit of imposter syndrome, which is, I had a lot of it first going in, makes you feel like you can do so much more. And I have to say, beyond just Chris and Dan, the projects team from Fifi to Bob to George, their patience and just willing to teach me anything and everything about all the different projects and the technical side about it, and letting me ask them a million different questions and not making me feel stupid because I don't have, such a technical deep background. That really helped me as well. And it's those individuals together really helped to make me feel like I don't need to know everything in order to be successful.
I love that. And I would echo that in my experience. Yeah, people that have multiple people that have insisted on being welcoming and letting me know that let's not worry about what you can't do. Let's focus on the things that you can do and where you can contribute. And once you get those experiences and building up that confidence, it makes all the world a difference of realizing the potential is limitless. Kubernetes can mean very different things depending on who you ask. Katie, for you, what is Kubernetes for you?
I think for me, Kubernetes is kind of infinite in the sense that it started out as this idea from Google, and it was donated to CNCF, and they really saw this kind of like necessity within cloud native, and it launched where cloud native is today, but it goes beyond just what cloud native is, right? You were able to see product was able to emerge from it, from observability to, product categories, from observability to networking to storage to GitOps, these infinite ideas and infinite areas of growth building off of Kubernetes in ways that I think that no one really thought was possible and no one thought was going to happen when it came to an open source project. It really became the Linux of cloud native. It became this standard across everything that we do today. And I think without it, I don't know we would be where we are. I don't think we would be where we are today without Kubernetes. And that's the reality of it. And that's the reality of open source. Without open source, that hive mentality of many minds are better than one really helps to launch the growth that technology can have. But the standard that Kubernetes brought, it just really set the bar, just like Linux set the bar many years ago.
I like that very, very much. That's great. And I know we touched on this a little bit previously with thinking about the KubeCon that you were involved in initially in 2016, but your background with the CNCF being involved from the very beginning. What did Kubernetes look like in those early days, and what stood out to you about its potential? I know you mentioned Dan Kahn's vision and how Chris embodied that, and we touched on some of those aspects, but I want to hear more about you mentioned people being in Seattle and the different booths that were there. Who are the organizations that were there early on? What was that like? And in terms of the scope of the project, in terms of setting the scene for it to be able to scale, what did that look like almost 10 years ago?
10 years ago. So back when it first became this project, it was a lot of different companies contributing, and I think very significant companies coming in and contributing that made the success of Kubernetes what it is today, right? You had Red Hat, you have Weaveworks, you had CoreOS, you had IBM, you had Cisco. Of course, Google was a pillar in that success. You had many individuals, you had Apple, you had all these different people coming in and contributing in different ways. And it really kind of drove that mix of passion. And it really, I think at first, it was kind of like when it first started, I think you had this kind of interest of what is Kubernetes going to be? Is it going to be from a vendor side, a threat or an opportunity? For startups, you started to see a lot of leaders come out with new ideas, and for some of the enterprises and things like that, they kind of took this back seat. And in Seattle, you really kind of saw that all merge together at once, right? People were like, I don't know what's going on here, but we know we need to be part of this, because if we're not, we're going to get left behind, and we have to be in the mix somehow. So you really saw that come together pretty quickly, right? Red Hat came out of the gate with, OpenShift. You had Cisco in the mix being a core contributor. You had Weaveworks and CoreOS, really, really big contributors from a startup standpoint, and really diving in and leading these new ideas and these new projects coming forward, and what that kind of looked like. And then it kind of allowed this landscape to kind of take place, right? We were kind of on a cusp of like a containers war, and it kind of came to a head, and then Kubernetes kind of won out, and it really consolidated the movement into creating that confidence for both vendors and enterprises alike that this was going to be the standard, and this is where they could really latch on to no longer creating their own kind of ancillary, orchestration, but to really build off of what Kubernetes was creating.
And, seeing this growth for over the course, of nearly, 10 years, what do you think were the key moments or turning points in its journey from being a new open source project to being the dominant force it is today? I know you highlighted the container orchestration war, as we saw that, with Mesos, et cetera. But in terms of milestones that you witnessed along the way that really stood out to you, could you name a few of those?
Yeah, of course. I think, as you noted, it definitely was the container wars. I think the biggest milestone was always and will always be Google donating the project to the CNCF. That signaled a change from the beginning for the project and it going open source, and the need for the standardization. And then, of course, the container wars came into play, and that consolidating the movement into one standard. And then the ecosystem had this huge explosion where we saw things like Helm and Prometheus and Envoy and Istio and dozens of other projects really starting to gain footing and flourish around Kubernetes, and CNCF creating kind of this like periodic table of a landscape within cloud native. And it has kind of set the standard of like what and how and where people can come in and contribute and play within this playground of different projects, and how they can be part of the product categories that are out there, whether that's observability or GitOps or storage or security, things like that. There's a lot of different ways that people can be part of it, and it's no longer just like this niche one area. So that kind of really took off, and that was really huge, I think, for the community. And then I think the biggest one was the enterprise adoption. It really became kind of like a table stakes for SaaS providers and startups and Fortune 500s alike. Having Kubernetes skills really has become a baseline for engineers. It's no longer just like engineers are being asked to have like Linux background. They're being asked to have Kubernetes background, and it's a requirement in a lot of jobs. So I think that was a huge pivotal turning point of the sustainability for the project.
That's a great point. And we've spoken to some organizations that, for example, only hire folks that have a CKA certification or in the process of getting that. So we've seen that, like you said, in the past, seeing Linux as being listed there, now seeing the things on the side of the, when it comes to Kubernetes. And we also observe that through, our own data and Kube careers, job listings, and things of that nature. Now, from your perspective, what role did CNCF play in shaping the Kubernetes story, and how did the community itself evolve as the project scaled globally? Now we're talking about, over 100,000 people in CNCF Slack, talking about people all over the place being represented in local community groups, being represented through ambassadors, being represented through KCDs. Walk me through that.
For me, it's hard to imagine Kubernetes without CNCF. I think the CNCF really helped to create a neutral space and trust for the community to come in and contribute. I think it allowed this kind of shift to become, like I said, that many minds is better than one, and the open source mentality to really drive it and launch it to where it is today. But then the CNCF really helped to provide that structure of governance and the COC and the certifications, the community programs, like you said, with the ambassadors and the SIGs and the tags, the KCDs, things like that, that help really bring the community in multifaceted ways. The CNCF is always driving to kind of build how they can support the community and provide the community with the best tools to be growing alongside the projects. And that also goes with certifications. We've seen that not only over the years, but especially in the last, I would say, 2 years, with Christoph coming into the CNCF and the amount of certifications that have came out underneath him being part of that team. You know, you have the platform engineering, you have Argo's certification, you have all these certifications that aren't just driving towards Kubernetes, but it's driving towards a larger overall cloud native kind of ecosystem and all the different projects underneath it, right? And there's this demand to be certified and to be supporting the community in those certification areas and making sure that they're able to level up in their careers. And the CNCF is making sure that that happens, because the reality is, in, I would say, 5 years' time, if you're not certified, you're likely not going to get a job as an engineer in some form or fashion, whether you're not certified in Kubernetes or GitOps or Argo or some kind of certification behind what you're able to do. You're going to really struggle to find an engineering job. And then they also help to really create that amplification broadly across the globe, which, you know, we talked about KubeCon Cloud Native Comms being a big part of that. But beyond that, I think there's also, you have the Cloud Native Security Con, you have Open Observability Day, all these other smaller kind of events, gRPC Conf, things like that are coming in that the CNCF helps to support to ensure not just the health of Kubernetes alone, but the health of all the projects that help to support Kubernetes. And without the CNCF, I think that there would have been kind of this like chaos that was happening. And the CNCF provides that structure. I know a lot of people have their own mixed thoughts about like what the CNCF brings in sometimes when it comes to the governance and the ways that the CNCF is involved and things like that. But it is incredibly hard to be on that side of things and ensuring that you're pleasing many people, and the team works really hard to ensure that they're doing their best to please as many people as they can.
Oh, that's
you're
a
never
really
going to
easy thing to do.
Yeah. You know, and you're never going to please everybody, right? Especially when you're working with a global community. And a lot of people have strong opinions about what, you know, the governance should look like, or what the project should be doing, or where we should be going. And the CNCF really does come in and keeps that neutrality to ensure that we're helping to bring everybody voices together and pushing it together effectively and forward, and with very little friction. I would never say without friction, but with as minimal friction as possible, and to really listen to the community and to bring in more projects that help continue to grow that global presence, but also grow the sustainability of the ecosystem in general.
And for someone that might be coming into the Kubernetes ecosystem now, what would you say is the most important context to understand about the bigger picture? You know, that you mentioned as well, like sometimes people can get bogged down in, you know, minor differences or maybe some friction or a message that could have been taken the wrong way despite good intentions. Yeah. But how can knowing, you know, the history of where this comes from, you know, going back to when the project was donated by Google in 2014, and other things that you mentioned along the way of the participation, different end users, things of that nature, all the work that's gone into this. How can knowing this history help them navigate their own journey, regardless of how they end up, joining the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we say it all the time. The ecosystem today can be overwhelming. And Kubernetes itself is not necessarily, it's still not easy to learn, but recognizing the history of the community and the history of the project is key. And I think the biggest portion of it is the community. And that's Kubernetes as a whole, and the community that drives Kubernetes values openness, it values standards, it values collaboration, and anybody and everybody who is in that community is willing to help someone. So coming into the community can feel daunting because you may feel like, where do I start? What project do I contribute to? What do all these acronyms mean? Who do I go to for help? What if I'm not technical enough? What tool should I use? Like, I'm overwhelmed, right? These things you're not alone in feeling this. A lot of people feel this when they come in here. Just know that you can post these in Slack. There's like a new contributor Slack channel that's like, hi, I'm new. I don't know where to start. Or, hi, I just started, donating or contributing to this project and I got stuck. And anybody who is helping in the ecosystem is going to jump in and help you, because that's really what the community is about. They want to see each other succeed. They want to build each other up, and they want to help someone new coming in be part of this and really find their footing and find a way to be part of the community, whether that's, through technical contributions or non-technical contributions, or being part of the Kubernetes, SIG release team, or being part of, the Argo project, whatever way you decide to kind of come into the ecosystem, there's someone there that's willing to help you. So just ask and recognize that that's what they want. I know it feels kind of like scary to do that, but you have to at some point, and know that this community really does value collaboration and really does value transparency and the openness and being solution oriented and being inventive and experimenting. Those are all things that are kind of along the line that kind of go back to the history of how this all started, because that's how Kubernetes started. It was all about tight-knit openness, collaboration, experimenting, and problem solving. And it's still true today.
And, looking back from Kubernetes early days to where it is now, what's one insight or lesson that you'd want every newcomer to carry with them? Something that you would say that captures the bigger picture of why this ecosystem matters?
I think this ecosystem matters. And I think the one lesson that I carry with me today is when 2020 happened, right? When we all went into that shutdown, and when people could have really, I think, stepped back and gave up on, contributing, or gave up on pushing forward, and no one would have really, no harm, no foul kind of thing on that. This community really persevered and continued. And it was really lovely to see, right? We still had these virtual events that were bringing in 26,000 people virtually for people who wanted to learn and to really grow and to be together. And it was in that moment that I realized that this was more than just the technology. This was about the community and what the community means and what the community brings to each individual beyond just, contributing and driving, the technology forward. It's about, how they support you in your career, how they support you as an individual, how they are there for you in times of need. And I think that's the most important part of this, is when you're part of an open source community, especially one that's as big as Cloud Native and CNCF, you're really going to be making these tight-knit friends and these tight-knit kind of connections with people that are going to go beyond just contributing to a project. It's going to go into this person's now a friend for life. And I can say that with a lot of the colleagues that I met from CNCF and a lot of the people that I've met in the ecosystem. I still talk to them daily, from transitioning from CNCF to Chronosphere, that, about all kinds of different things. And, whether it's something personal to what's happening in what I'm doing, or asking for advice on how I should be going about, contributing or things like that. These people are pivotal. And I think that's the lessons that I learned when it comes to being part of this community is it's not just the technology, it's the people.